Kroyer is best known for the landscape and figural paintings he produced as a member of the turn-of-the-century art colony in Skagen, or Skagen, Denmark. And it was in significant part due to Kroyer's stylishly elegant images of its recreational life that Skagen emerged in the 1880s and 1890s as a world-renowned summer beach resort. In Kroyer's paintings, the once threatening waters of the Kattegat Sea were tamed into a glistening backdrop for the evening promenades of pretty people and the splashing amusements of playful children. It was Kroyer, explains art historian Elizabeth Fabricius, who was the leading shaper of, quote, the myth of Skagen as a synonym for sun and summer fun, partying and youth, happiness and the idyll of sunlit summer nights, close quote. This mood of reverie and nostalgia has inflected the language of Kroyer's reception since his lifetime and has made him one of the more romanticized figures in the history of 19th century Danish art. In a sense, Kroyer has come down to us as a sort of happy-go-lucky genius, technically brilliant, but rather light on substance. As Annette Johansson observes, Kroyer's oeuvre, quote, simply gave the impression that motifs didn't matter to him as such, because it was only the painterly process that interested him. Traces of painterly technique in his work were perceived as expressions of superficiality, and that criticism persists to this day, close quote. The traces to which Johansson refers are primarily the anti-classical approaches to painting that Kroyer learned during his first extended study trip in France. Importantly, Johansson demonstrates that these early flourishes were not mere dabblings, but rather indications of Kroyer's desire to effect a more modern Parisian style of painting. My work builds on these observations to propose that Kroyer's formal experimentations were part of a larger representational strategy, one with cultural and political implications beyond Skagen, which came to fruition in his landscapes and figural paintings from Skagen. Before I develop this idea, it might be useful to mention some aspects of the historical context from which Kroyer emerged. The period roughly between 1815 and 1850 is often referred to as Denmark's Golden Age, and it had seen a remarkable flourishing of successful creative activity in all areas of the arts. In painting, the age was largely defined by the teachings of Christopher Wilhelm Eckersberg, who exerted a towering influence as a professor at the academy. A primary pedagogical goal for Eckersberg was to instill in his pupils a profound respect for humility, simplicity, and order in painting, to capture and accentuate the essence of a natural scene through a supreme clarity of focus on individual objects, even those in the far distance. Through the 1830s and 1840s, Eckersberg's students were thus engaged in the quest to achieve an exquisite and vibrant naturalism in which everything in sight was valued for its contributions to a living and unified whole. With Eckersberg's death in 1853, however, the momentum of innovation and experimentation that he had fostered slowly dissipated, and from the 1850s and through to Kroyer's student days, academy training was more often directed toward replicating the apex of Golden Age naturalism rather than toward transcending this heritage or forging new interests. The result was an approach to painting that idealized clarity and detail at the expense of atmosphere and mood. Thus, what had been Eckersberg's refreshingly novel art of the everyday had, in his absence, become a banal and fastidious art of the trivial. By the late 1870s, art critics and observers in Copenhagen were expressing a growing dissatisfaction with the stiff and tired stagnancy of the academy. The situation came to a head in the 1878 International Exposition in Paris, which, according to Egil Brunnicke, quote, became the single worst fiasco that Danish art had experienced in an international forum to that point, close quote. Compared to the French art on view, Copenhagen seemed to have lost itself in a sort of Biedermeier dream, wallowing in a bland bourgeois provinciality. Writing for the Gazette de Beaux-Arts, Edmond Duranty found the Danish exhibit, which included the works you see here, quote, painstaking, meticulous, cold, and dry, close quote. And Charles Blanc went so far as to quip that Denmark, quote, appears to have artists, but it has no art. Close quote. Ironically, while Eckersberg was still seen as the great master whose creative heights Denmark's subsequent painters had failed to regain, it was partly Eckersberg's own legacy, that is his total dedication to Danish subject matter, that isolated them now. Let's see, we skipped that one, we shouldn't have. There we go. Of more profound consequence was the national romantic project of formulating a Danish school of art, which was championed by both Eckersberg and a highly influential nationalist critic and academy professor, N.L. Høyen, and which had gained a wide influence at the academy by the 1840s. Høyen propounded a national art that looked to Denmark and to the Danes for inspiration and subject matter. Additionally, this inclination toward ethnic solipsism was also central to the National Liberal political party's culture, that is, culture of unity, I beg your pardon, which became especially difficult to resist after Denmark's resounding defeat by Prussia in the Second War of Schleswig in 1864. The general result was a rigidly insular cultural program that exerted itself especially forcefully on the humanities and held its insularity to be its strongest virtue. If there is a single feature or tendency that characterizes Kroyer's, sorry. Oh, hello. This is actually is blue period. Very forward-looking. Okay, looks good. These are the ones. Yeah, good. So we're back to right. Okay. Let's see what happened here. Yes. If there is a single feature or tendency that characterizes Kroyer's Skagen paintings, it is the effort he continually seemed to be making to negotiate the two poles of his artistic heritage. On the one hand, the stable, conservative romanticism of the Academy. On the other, the more experimental and dynamic compositional techniques he observed in fin de siècle Paris. Kroyer, by far the most internationally active painter in Denmark, exhibited in Paris at both the Champs-Élysées and Champ de Mars salons, nearly as frequently as he did in Copenhagen from 1890 on. And his Skagen paintings strongly suggest that he was looking for a formal mode that would allow his pictures to be equally striking in both places. No matter how aggressively Kroyer departed from the compositional principles he had learned in Copenhagen, he was never willing entirely to discard the general cleanliness of representation they were meant to perpetuate. For example, art historian Claus Olsen has suggested that the preoccupation with strong diagonals and unconventional pictorial balance in Kroyer's Skagen paintings may have reflected an influence of the Japanese visual aesthetic that had transformed Parisian modernism in the 1870s. Similarly, Jens Erik Sørensen has noted Kroyer's avid interest in photography and the less rigid attitude toward compositional framing and balance that it invited. Probably before his arrival at Skagen, and certainly by the time he purchased his first camera in 1885, photographs were regular and integral preparatory devices in Kroyer's creative routine. Sørensen demonstrates that Kroyer was often attempting to capture in his paintings the accidental spirit of the spontaneous snapshot. In People of Skagen Set Sail for Night Fishing, the mast of the departing cutter is sliced through, as if by the frame of an unsteady viewfinder. And in Artists on Skagen South Beach, the eponymous artists are very nearly cut out of the frame altogether. Perhaps the most salient formal feature of Parisian modernism to be incorporated in Kroyer's Skagen works was the elasticity of pictorial space. In none of Kroyer's works was this effect more dramatically demonstrated than in the steep shooting perspective of Skagen South Beach. Only rarely was perspective space collapsed so strikingly in Kroyer's subsequent pictures. But the experiment did yield two other results that would become hallmarks of his most famous Skagen paintings: the high horizon line and the vibrant, saturated color palette that most prominently featured a moody, sensuous spectrum of blues. Indeed, the decade of the 1890s is known as Kroyer's Blue Period, and it was in these paintings, more than any others, that Skagen took on the easy, sultry, stable, and timelessly beguiling mystique upon which its world renowned as a hedonist paradise would be predicated. In paintings such as Summer Evening at Skagen and Summer Evening on Skagen South Beach, Kroyer painted a world of silky atmosphere and cool reverie, which visually and emotively was unique in the art of the colony. In reference to this informal group of pictures, and especially in reference to works like this one, in which Kroyer features the moon rising over the water, and Eddie Johansen has remarked on the affinity of Kroyer's beach scenes with the Skæningsmaleri, the moody, atmospheric painting that he had encountered in Paris. Kroyer had participated in the International Exposition at Galerie Jacques Petit in 1885, and would therefore likely have seen a nocturne by Whistler, such as this nocturne in blue and gold, and a similarly solemn and brooding atmosphere regularly characterized the works of Thomas Alexander Harrison, a good friend of Kroyer and a successful fellow exhibitor at Champ de Mars throughout the 1890s. As Johansen describes, paintings such as Harrison's Seascape Moonlight indicate a fascination for liminal times of day, for atmospheric phenomena that, quote, blur the physical world and dissolve its contours, close quote. In this context, Kroyer's blue-toned Skagen paintings were, quote, quite consistent with the tendencies of international painting of the time, close quote. The arguments presented by Olsen, Sørensen, and Johansen, and others regarding possible sources of Kroyer's style are all convincing. That Kroyer was incorporating Parisian influences into his paintings in an effort to make them more modern for the sake of his Danish audience certainly seems persuasive. And yet these findings are not entirely satisfactory because first, they do not recognize the extent to which Kroyer was also painting for his French audience. And second, they do not address the persistent grounding of Kroyer's images in the naturalist style of his Copenhagen Academy training. If Kroyer's quest for modernity was motivated by his belief in the Parisian avant-garde as the ultimate index of modernity, then why was his incorporation of it so tentative? Why did he adopt Parisian modernity as a catalog of isolated compositional devices to be inserted into scenes whose opticality often suggested another philosophy of pictorial design altogether? Consider this rather remarkable example, for instance. It's clear here that Kroyer was testing the boundaries of asymmetry in this work. But it's also interesting to note the rather conventional tenor of the painting as a whole. If Kroyer here had in mind the Japonisme to which he was regularly exposed in Paris, as seems quite plausible, why did he not carry it through with the collapse of pictorial space and reductive depiction of objects that would have attended it? Why the comforting regression of perspective space, and why the expressive detail in waves and clouds? For all of Kroyer's formal and compositional experimentations, he never allowed himself to forsake the steady sobriety of his academic roots. For instance, the pictorial space in Summer Evening at Skagen is strangely distorted, an effect created by a wide perspective arc that sweeps out over the tide and then sharply up to an unrealistically high horizon line. The objects that occupy this space, as well as the ground they stand on, however, are painted in a meticulously detailed and crisply realistic style. Similarly, the photographic spontaneity in people as Skagen set sail for night fishing is not reinforced or enhanced by a commensurately spontaneous lack of focus. Indeed, the glassy blue water, the manta ray skeleton on the beach, and the two boats shoving off could hardly be more faithfully depicted. On the one hand, the apparent laziness of Kroyer's content has been perceived as a sort of failure to live up to his potential. On the other hand, Kroyer's abilities have been described as preternatural, portraying him as an artist who could do anything, faster and better than anyone else, without giving it a thought. That a painter of such talent consistently squandered it on trivial motifs has in turn led to the image of Kroyer as an accidental genius, a sort of good-hearted body with a gift, a reflector who painted by instinct and borrowed at random from those formal elements he saw in Paris that interested him. I would argue that Kroyer's goals were more complicated than this. That he was trying to create a visual style calibrated to be effective not only in Copenhagen, but in Paris as well. A negotiated modernism that would be at once comfortingly familiar and intriguingly exotic to both places, to both audiences. After all, paintings that resembled those of other exhibitors might have been sufficient to earn Kroyer a place or two on the wall of the Paris Salon, but they would hardly have caused him to be singled out, not only in Copenhagen, but in Paris as well. In a review of the 1900 International Exposition, for instance, the French critic Camille Mauclair declared that, quote, "Denmark presents only one beautiful painter, but he is of considerable value. That is Mr. Kroyer," close quote. In the same year, critic Léonce Benedy took it for granted that Kroyer was, quote, "the artist who is, without doubt, the most important figure in the Danish school," close quote. Kroyer's cautiously, I better take, I have one of these. That ought to do. Okay. Kroyer's cautiously prospective style resonated deeply in Copenhagen because it had encouraged the hope that he would be the leader of an international future for Danish art. And it seems that this hope resonated in Kroyer as well. The dissatisfaction with the Copenhagen Academy that had been mounting in the 1870s reached a critical juncture in 1881, shortly after Kroyer's return from studies abroad, when a group of artists and students proposed that an independent academy be founded and that its curriculum be based on the current Parisian model. In the next year, the Artists' Free Study Schools was established in Copenhagen with Kroyer and fellow painter Laurits Tuxen as its directors. Notwithstanding the merciless discipline of Kroyer's and Tuxen's pedagogical styles, students persevered precisely because what they learned, which was French valeur painting, was both new and bold and methodical in comparison to what the Copenhagen Academy had offered. In 1888, Kroyer had become the standard bearer for the Danish school, had already become the standard bearer for the Danish school, and a sort of European ambassador for Danish art. Having helped to arrange an exhibition of French art in Copenhagen, he was appointed to the committee charged with organizing the contribution of Danish fine art to the 1889 International Exposition in Paris. As he made clear in an uncommonly zealous letter to fellow artist and committee member Viggo Johansen, Kroyer deemed Denmark's international success in this venture to be of the utmost importance for the future. Quote, "Our art, like our country, is little by little becoming known in Europe. They are starting to notice and expect something of us. Let us now show that we deserve it. Let us now show the very best that we have." Close quote. If the committee did not pull itself together and finalize its decisions, warned Kroyer, quote, "I will regard it as a personal affront to me, particularly since I have told the French so much about what they will see when the Danes arrive," close quote. It was Kroyer's wish, whether for the sake of his career or his country, to fashion a profile for Danish art on the continent, and the paintings of his blue period at Skagen were the primary submissions to this enterprise. Kroyer gave an indication of Skagen's significance for his art in a 1907 interview. Quote, "There is especially a mood I can't resist up at Skagen," explained Kroyer. "When the soft moonlight shines over the beach, I am there immediately with my sketchbook. When the sun is going down, when the moon is rising over the sea, hanging there crystal clear, and the water, smooth as glass, reflects its light, and then the fishermen standing on the beach and the cutters pushing out and sitting in the water with just a little slack in their sails. That has, in recent years, been my favorite moment." Close quote. This statement, one of the most widely cited in the Kroyer literature, has usually been offered as evidence of Kroyer's sentimentality and appreciation of beautiful things. That maybe, but there's also evidence that he was noticing a highly evocative visual phenomenon of which he could make strategic use. One of the distinguishing features of Kroyer's blue paintings is his subtle depiction of precisely that moment when Skagen's sky is illuminated by two sources of natural light. Kroyer had painted this occurrence as early as 1884 in People of Skagen Set Sail for Night Fishing. The source of light that is actually seen in this painting is not the key light, but the filler. The scene is primarily illuminated by the sun, bathing the sails in a warm light as it sets behind us and out of frame. While over the sea, in the distance, an ivory moon offers a soft but unmistakable reply. Kroyer was apparently pleased with this mode of representing the simultaneous light sources. As he continued to work with this motif, it would almost always be the moon that was painted and the sun that was implied. As in the golden undulations of the woman's dress in Summer Evening at Skagen, and the warm glow of bare skin in Boys Bathing on a Summer Evening, it is interesting to note that although the dual light motif was an observable phenomenon at Skagen, none of the other colonists seemed to pay it much attention. While Kroyer's blue period paintings, particularly those that involved the dual light motif, were important for the romantic appeal of Skagen in Denmark, they were of greater significance in distinguishing Kroyer's work in the eyes of his Parisian audience, distinguishing his work as particularly Danish. Kroyer's paintings did not merely enter or replicate the category of atmospheric landscape paintings that Whistler had mastered in the 1870s. While they passed fittingly into this group of pictures, they also enhanced and complicated it in unprecedented ways. While Whistler's nocturnes were remarkable for their crystallization of a liminal moment in the familiar cycle of time, the simultaneously sun and moonlit evenings in Kroyer's blue pictures seem to render another kind of time in which, as one French critic put it, quote, "The night approaches little by little, gradually, and the blue of the sky disintegrates. Everything is rendered to this effect with supreme surety and delicacy. The marine landscape, the ambiguity of the hour, the last rays of the disappearing sun," close quote. Scenes such as Boys Bathing on a Summer Evening were layered in a rich natural light in which Maurice Hamel saw, quote, "the essential clarity of the north that emerges from within," close quote. It is important to realize that the notion of the mystic light of the north, which became a standardized European frame of reference to Scandinavian painting after the turn of the century, had not yet been reified when Kroyer first exhibited in Paris. The French critics of the 1880s clearly had a somewhat reductive view of Scandinavia, tending to think of artists from Denmark, Sweden, and Norway in regional group terms rather than as nationals. But this regional stereotype was based more on romantic assumptions about heroic landscapes than it was about naturo-symbolist fascinations with the midnight sun. Those were not quite common currency among these writers in the 1880s. It is not claimed here that Kroyer introduced the dual light phenomenon to the salon, but his depictions of it awakened a good deal of interest and in his pictures and curiosity about the place they represented. An example is found in a telling anecdote with which I'll conclude about Kroyer and French painter Albert Bénard. As Annette Johansen relates, Kroyer and Bénard had met in Paris sometime in the early 1880s and maintained a close friendship and active correspondence until Kroyer's death in 1909. In an 1888 letter to Kroyer, Bénard recalls a pleasant visit that he and his wife had made to Denmark. What had particularly impressed them both were the late evenings, the mood, as Bénard added, that Kroyer captured so well on canvas. Skagen's late summer evenings allowed Kroyer to refine the hybrid international style which he had been developing since his arrival at the colony in 1882. It was a steady and unassuming pictorial language, that managed to assert a version of French modernism in Copenhagen and a sophisticated and enchanting view of Denmark in Paris. The result was the pictorial group for which both he and Skagen became internationally famous. Thank you.